Today, I'm talking to Penny Jolson, writer of young adult thrillers and mysteries. Really lovely to see you, Penny, and have you here today. So, Penny, your novels have protagonists who are disabled or have chronic illness. Does this decision stem from personal experience?
Well, when I set out to write a thriller, I wasn't actually thinking about representing disabled people or people with chronic illness, but I had this idea of a character who knew the identity of a murderer but couldn't tell anyone for some reason. And the character of Gemma jumped into my head, and she was this girl with severe cerebral palsy, and that stemmed from experience in working with people who had cerebral palsy in the past. And realising how little representation there was for people with disabilities, I did feel inspired to do more of that. And my second book, which has a character with ME, related to my own experience of ME. So that came very much from personal experience.
I was going to ask you about your novel Girl in the Window, and the central character, Cassia, has ME. So what part of your personal experience inspired this story?
Well, the experience of being very restricted in my life and not being able to go out, not being able to do normal things, and of the way other people react to that, of how friends drift away, of how the world kind of closes down. I had ME when I was 25 and was quite badly affected for 10 years and then improved. But I found it quite hard to think about how bad it was at that time, because having moved on a bit, I didn't really want to think about it. So it was a bit scary to try and write a book where I had a character and have to revisit what it was like, and talk to a lot of other people, particularly younger people who had it in their teens, because I was writing about a teenager with ME. So yes, it brought it all back, but in particular that feeling of isolation, I think, and of people just not really understanding.
And what do you think needs to be done to improve the lives of people with ME?
Well, I think recognition and understanding is the first thing. I was really shocked, having had ME 25 years ago initially, how little has changed and how little progress has been made. It really did shock me. So still people aren't recognised, people don't understand. The medical establishment needs to take it more seriously. I'm hoping that through long COVID, that people are taking more interest and are more aware of it, and that more research will be done. And that's the other thing that really needs to happen, a lot more research and more support on the ground for people. People are so much still left on their own with it, without enough support.
As you say, you had ME 25 years ago. What words of encouragement would you give to people living with ME now?
Don't lose hope. You can improve. For me, I didn't improve for 10 years, and then I did improve. So it can happen at any time. And also research could lead to things that might make a difference for you. So don't give up hope, and do continue to seek support as well. Support is there. May not be medical support, but there are people who will listen and who do understand. So do look out for those people and find groups and people who can be supportive.
Thank you, Penny, and thank you for talking to ME Action UK today and taking part in Millions Missing. Today we have Marcus Sedgwick with us, multi-award-winning, multi-talented writer, illustrator and musician. Thank you so much for talking to us today, Marcus.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You have written about your experience of ME. Can you tell me how you felt when you were first diagnosed?
Well, that's you start with a very interesting question, because as the early months of the illness developed, I came to the conclusion that I hadn't been diagnosed. After about 9 months, my main GP gave me the diagnosis of, she said, well, you can say you have post-infectious fatigue syndrome if you want a diagnosis, she said. And I really wasn't so au fait with this, you know. Why would I have been? At the start, I really had no idea what lay behind these diagnoses, these lack of diagnoses, the controversies around whether we call it chronic fatigue syndrome or we call it ME. All of this was complete mystery to me. And chronic fatigue syndrome at that time seemed to me to be pedantically accurate, but totally useless, in that it was merely your doctor giving you a fancy name for what you had told them was wrong with you in the first place, i.e. you're tired all the time, chronic fatigue syndrome, there's a bunch of weird symptoms that go along with it. And only later did I suddenly open the door into the whole world of horror of why your doctor might want to call it chronic fatigue syndrome and not ME. My GP was a really lovely and supportive woman, but when I first became ill, unfortunately, she was on maternity leave and I saw 2 other doctors instead. And this really was what started me down a whole extra journey, horrible journey, because the very first doctor I saw told me that it was all in my head. And she did so very quickly. And by quickly, I mean, I think I had seen her twice, maybe 3 times, had one lot of very basic blood work done. Really fundamental things. She hadn't tested me for thyroid function. I had come back from Asia clearly with some kind of infection. I had clinical symptoms, temperature, aches, aching bones, aching muscles, earache, diarrhea, I mean, the list was as long as my arm. And then she was telling me, Millie, it was in my head. And so right from the start, I was shocked. I couldn't believe these words were coming out of her mouth. I very quickly realized that my entire idea of medicine was turned overhead within a few months, basically.
Your novel Snowflake is about a young man in a community with multiple chemical sensitivity. Was this a way of exploring chronic illness without it getting too personal?
Yeah, it's funny. It's probably not immediately obvious. I wrote this book, and I didn't intend to write this book or a book about the community of people in Snowflake. You just go exploring every little possible avenue that might make you better, or at least might tell you what's wrong with you. That would have been a start. And I said, I don't think anyone's going to want to read a book about a bunch of sick people in the desert, to be honest. But I don't know whether it was because of that or just because I was so moved by these people, what they've been through. And when you get an undiagnosed, chronic, misunderstood illness, it's an awful journey you have to take. But the prejudice they've all been through, the doubt, I mean, this is what I recognized. And so very soon, yes, I couldn't stop myself writing about them, but exactly as you say, it was a way of distancing itself slightly from myself by not directly writing about ME and writing about MCS instead.
For the last 3 years, you have been working on a project about ME, the All in Your Head project. Can you tell me more about that?
I've been working on this book and hopefully associated mini podcast called All in Your Head because of what that first doctor said to me, these 4 words, all in your head, which just stuck. And, as the years went by, I realized that the burden of suffering that I've had from being doubted and effectively attacked, a doctor turns around and tells you you're making up or you're a hypochondriac. And I make the case in the book that in the modern, secular world like Great Britain, who is there that you hold in greater stead than your doctor? You might need a lawyer 2, 3, 4 times in your life. You'll need a mortician once in your life. But a doctor is someone you need in and out of your life as you go through, and we look up to them. And I couldn't get these 4 words out of my head. And I realized that I wasn't only struggling with the illness, I was struggling with the burden of being doubted. We are going to see an explosion of people with what we're now calling long COVID. There's going to be not just, I don't want to put a figure on it, but multiple times more people going through this process of you going into the doctor and saying, well, I'm still ill, it's 6 months later, and them telling you it's psychosomatic. Back 7 years ago when I was first ill, after about 6 months or 9 months, my NICE GP came back and suggested that the NHS NICE recommended graded exercise therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. I managed, fortunately for me, I didn't know any of this at the time, I managed to avoid the graded exercise therapy. I'm really glad I did. But I did agree to cognitive behavioral therapy. I'd had CBT in the past for a different problem and found it very effective. So I went and I had 6 weeks of CBT, didn't do anything for my illness, didn't do anything for the way I felt about my illness. But that course of CBT will have cost the NHS 6 hours of a therapist's time. That 6 hours of a therapist's time is infinitely less than me going back into the doctor every 2 weeks and saying, but you haven't tested me for this, and you haven't tested me for this, and you haven't tested me for this. And I spoke in the course of the interviews I've done for the book and the podcast, I spoke to an amazing bioethicist, and she explained to me, using the NHS's figures, that we are the people who cost the NHS the most money. And by we, I mean anyone who a doctor doesn't know what is wrong with them. And so therefore the financial burden that long COVID potentially represents could cripple health systems around the world. And therefore there will be this massive internal pressure saying, tell them it's psychosomatic, you can sweep them under the carpet, give them some CBT, job done. It was exactly a year ago, I made 2 predictions. And the first prediction is, because I think it was blindingly obvious to anyone, you know, who's, for me, my ME came on clearly as a result, I believe it was a viral infection, but as a result of an infection. So it seemed to me immediately obvious, and I found some statistics for SARS, for example, and what happened after SARS. 87% of people who had SARS said they never felt the same again. It's a related disease. We can't extrapolate the statistics exactly, but you know, if any kind of percentage of people with COVID get, you know, so I made this prediction a year ago. I wrote to 6 national newspapers and said there's going to be an explosion of ME, whatever you want to call it. None of them were interested. None of them replied. So I put it on my blog exactly a year ago today, I think. So that was my first prediction, which I don't take any great credit for, because I think, as I said, it was blinding obvious. My second prediction, or my second belief, was that because the cause of long COVID would be known, i.e. you had COVID, that people wouldn't be doubted in the same way. But it really seems, I don't know what you're thinking about this, because I really feel like it's very much up in the air. You see people being taken seriously and a lot of articles saying people are being gaslighted already.
What could doctors have done to make a difference when you were first ill or first diagnosed?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and one, you know, you can't rerun your life, but I really think it was just one of those moments where I just got the bad deal of the deck, because if my normal GP had been there, not on maternity leave, I don't think she would have treated me the same way. And instead I saw this young woman. She was actually a medical student in her final year at the Cambridge University of Cambridge Medical School. In the back of my head, I thought this person will have the latest science up their sleeve. But clearly the latest science she had up her sleeve, she must have just come direct from a lecture on psychosomatic medicine, whatever that is, and decided within a snap judgment to make this statement about being, this illness being all in my head. I think it would have made such a huge difference to me had someone just believed what I was telling them. I was scared. I was sicker than I'd ever been in my life. I knew something was like seriously wrong. And then I was just in this state of shock of, this can't be happening. I've turned to you for help. And it would have, I think it would have made all the difference in the world had someone just simply believed me.
What would you say to other people suffering from ME at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say. And it, you know, we're talking about ME here, but I think this applies to all chronic misunderstood illnesses. For example, just yesterday, a friend of mine who is a psychotherapist here is treating a man with severe Lyme disease, or trying to help him. And she suggested he speak to me. I don't have Lyme disease, he doesn't have ME, but I think there's a conversation between all these diseases, because what is underlying them all is this fact of being doubted. It's really important to remember that there are other people out there. And this is why any action and, you know, the campaigns that we're running are so important to spread awareness. And, you know, as I said, this is, on one hand, it's a minority illness. On the other hand, everyone knows someone who has ME. I mean, that was one of the first things that struck me when I became ill, was people saying, oh yeah, so-and-so had that, my aunt had that, you know, or has that. There is a community of people out there who are prepared to listen and support you and know what it's like. And that thing of, because you suddenly become housebound or bedbound, and you may lose friends, you may lose family members, you can suddenly become very, very isolated, and finding ways to remain connected and interact with other people, I think, has been really, really important.
Finally, what do you think needs to be done to improve the lives of people with ME?
Well, there's a lot to say about this, and as I said earlier, I think the very simplest thing is to take us seriously. I think there needs to be a massive expose of the reasons, the motivations why your GP might tell you that this disease is psychosomatic. If we were to really expose the truth behind the gender bias behind this disease as well, it's absolutely horrific. And that is a issue that goes back, that's an issue of prejudice that goes back centuries. And that's the most important thing that I think needs to happen first, is to be taken seriously.
I think that's very true, Marcus. And thank you for talking to us today. It has been wonderful to see and hear you and hear your thoughts. And again, thanks from all at ME Action.
My pleasure. No, thank you very much for having me. I very much appreciate the time to talk.
Delighted to be talking to Claire Wade, award-winning writer and author of The Choice. Hello, Claire.
Hi.
My first question is, you were bedbound for 6 years with severe ME. What kept you going during this time?
It was my imagination. I was in a dark room 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I couldn't read or listen to music or watch television or do any of the things that I loved. And I was really struggling to cope. And the only way that I found to keep me going was to imagine that I was doing other things. So imagining that I was other places, visiting different countries, going on adventures, and just having a much better time than I really was. But gradually that started becoming harder because I had to stop imagining. I could only concentrate for a minute or so at a time. And the re-entry basically into the real world was really hard. So instead of imagining I was somewhere else doing things, I started to create characters in my head, and I would imagine the adventures that they were going on. And I didn't realize at that point that I was basically writing stories in my head, but that was what I was doing. So it was my escape and my lifeline, and the start of a career without me even realizing it. I write about women who are trapped in their lives, in their circumstances, and it's their desire to break free from the constraints that they feel and to make things different, to make things better, not just for themselves, but for the people around them. And I don't think I was ever intentionally doing that until I was looking back on The Choice and realizing that's my theme. And now all the books that I'm writing since The Choice are all based around women trying to make changes in their lives when they feel powerless, and discovering where they have the power and what changes they can actually make.
And you set up Authors with Disabilities and Chronic Illnesses, which is a peer support network for authors living and working with health challenges. Can you tell us a little about this?
The Choice got published because I won the Good Housekeeping novel competition, and the prize was a signing with an agent and a book deal with Orion, which was fantastic. This was what I had been dreaming of and had been working for 8 years for. So it was everything I wanted, but I was still severely affected with ME, and I had underestimated what was going to be involved in the process of publishing and how much work and energy it was going to require. And I didn't know how to fit my disability and my health needs in with an industry that doesn't have a lot of disabled authors. So I went to the Society of Authors just after I'd got my deal and just asked for advice, and there wasn't anything. There was nothing really in terms of guidance or anybody that I could talk to. So I asked them if they would be interested in setting up a group to be able to support authors like myself. And as I discovered, there are lots of authors out there with disabilities and chronic illnesses. And I co-founded the group, and we've come together and we meet virtually once a month, and we have a Facebook group, and it's just a brilliant way to be able to share your experiences and to seek support and encouragement and to actually be able to celebrate things. And we're looking at trying to make a change in the publishing industry, trying to increase representation, to increase the diverse voices that are published, and we're slowly making changes, and that's really exciting to see.
What do you think needs to be done now to improve the lives of people with ME?
So much, so much. I mean, fundamentally, there needs to be more research. There needs to be more understanding of the biomedical causes, and there needs to be a treatment plan that doesn't involve saying go away and don't do very much, because that's not treatment. I think that lockdown recently has helped show people how much they can actually adapt to people who are bed or housebound and who have limited mobility and restrictions on their lives. Things that we were told were not possible now are possible. Things like Zoom and interacting online. And I think people have been given a taste of what our lives are like. And I think as the world starts to reopen, it's important that that information and that understanding doesn't go away, and that it then carries into the way everything works, from shopping to meeting people to working. I think there are adaptations that are still needed and that can be made if people are willing.
And what words of encouragement would you give to people with ME?
ME's hard, and it affects every area of your life. And there are times where you just feel like everything is impossible. But there are ways of doing things if you have a dream. I never thought I would get published, but it was something that I really wanted. And I found a way to do it in very small steps, very gradual steps. It might take me much longer than most other people to do things, but I got there. It took me 8 years from going from the idea of the choice to actually finishing it, getting it published, and holding the book in my hands. And it was hard work, and I have had to adapt, and I've had to ask for adaptions from my editor, from Orion, and I've had to be brave, but it is possible. And I think hope has kept me going, and seeing progress in something that mattered to me has helped. Having something tangible really matters. At the end of your day, it can be a sticker on a card, which was all I could do when I was first bedbound. It can be a piece of jewelry that you've made. It can be anything that is physical that you can hold and say, I did this. And for me, that was writing a book. And a page a day for a year is a book by the end. And my energy levels have fluctuated. They've gone up and down. They're down at the moment. I had a relapse after my book came out. I've had to cut back on how much that I can write, but I am still working on my next book. And I feel like I'm doing something with my life. It might not be all the things that I want to do with my life. It might just be a tiny amount, but it's something. And for me, that keeps me going. So I think find what keeps you going, find a way to adapt it to what you can do at the time, and just focus on that and let everything else fall away.